Pack of velociraptors abandon injured member. Then T-Rex steps in with a shocking act. How will this story unfold? To find out, watch the video to the end. But first, please subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications to get more stories like this. The jungle was alive with movement. Branches shook and leaves rustled as the pack of velociraptors moved swiftly through the underbrush. Their movements were silent, almost ghost-like, their sleek bodies darting between trees with the precision of well-honed hunters. Muscles rippled beneath their dark, leathery skin, and their amber eyes scanned the world around them with unrelenting focus. Every step, every breath, every twitch of their tails served a purpose. They were the ultimate predators, perfected by nature's brutal hand. The leader of the pack, larger than the others and adorned with faint scars from battles long past, stopped abruptly. Its head snapped to the side, nostrils flaring as it caught the faint scent of prey. It emitted a low, guttural growl, a signal to the others. The pack froze in unison, each member turning its head in the same direction, like shadows following a single mind. Then they moved. The jungle erupted with energy as the raptors broke into a sprint. The underbrush parted before them. Ferns trampled underfoot as they gave chase to something unseen. Their claws dug into the earth, propelling them forward at blinding speed. Their jaws, lined with rows of razor-sharp teeth, clicked open and closed in anticipation. But among them, at the very back of the pack, one raptor lagged behind. It was smaller than the others, and its movements lacked the same grace and fluidity. Its back leg dragged slightly, each step uneven, as though it were wounded. A gash ran along its thigh, old but deep enough that the damage lingered, slowing it down. With every step, it fell farther behind, until the rest of the pack began to disappear into the dense foliage ahead. The injured raptor let out a soft screech, half warning, half pleading. Its eyes darted nervously as it strained to keep up, but the distance widened, its packmates now little more than shadows in the trees. Then the leader of the pack stopped again. The rest of the raptors skidded to a halt, crouched low, panting softly as they waited for orders. The leader turned its head, golden eyes narrowing as it looked back toward the injured member struggling in the distance. It made a sound low, sharp, and unmistakable. A dismissal. The other raptors hesitated for only a moment before their heads turned as well, focusing on the injured raptor with cold, detached interest. Slowly, one by one, they rose to their full height and began circling back toward it, their movements no longer filled with the quiet grace of hunters. Now, they were deliberate, predatory in a way that was almost cruel. The injured raptor stopped in its tracks, its sides heaving with effort. Its eyes flicked between the others as they drew closer, its sharp mind calculating what was happening. These were its packmates, creatures it had followed, trusted. Yet now, they looked at it as though it were no longer one of them. The leader approached first, towering over the injured raptor as it let out a warning hiss. The smaller raptor crouched low, its instincts screaming at it to submit, to make itself small. It let out a soft, whimpering sound, almost apologetic. But there was no mercy in the leader's gaze. With a sudden swipe, the leader lashed out with its claw, grazing the injured raptor's side. The blow sent it sprawling into the dirt with a sharp cry of pain. The others watched, silent and still, waiting to see what their leader would decide. The smaller raptor struggled to stand, its limbs trembling, but the leader merely turned away, issuing one final growl. Abandoned, the pack vanished into the trees once more, leaving the injured raptor alone in the clearing. It watched them go, its breath ragged and shallow as it struggled to process what had just happened. It was alone now, cast aside like a broken tool no longer of use. The jungle grew silent once again, but this silence felt different, thicker somehow, as though the forest itself was holding its breath. The raptor lowered its head, its chest rising and falling as exhaustion set in. It knew what would come next. Alone and injured, it wouldn't survive long. The jungle had no sympathy for weakness. Then the ground began to tremble. The raptor's head snapped up, its body tense as it searched for the source. The tremors were faint at first, like a distant heartbeat, but they grew stronger with every passing second. Leaves shook, and the air seemed to vibrate with the force of something enormous approaching. Thud, thud, thud. The injured raptor's eyes widened, its muscles locking in place as instinct screamed at it to run. But it couldn't, not this time. It was too tired, too broken. All it could do was stand there as the shadow loomed closer, the trees swaying as though bowing in submission to the force moving through them. And then it stepped into view. The Tyrannosaurus Rex was a force of nature, a living monument to raw power. Its massive frame dwarfed everything around it, each footfall shaking the earth as though the world itself recoiled in fear. Its thick, muscular tail swayed behind it like a pendulum, counterbalancing its every movement. The sunlight filtering through the trees cast sharp shadows across its scaly skin, highlighting the ridges and scars that lined its body, evidence of countless battles won. Its head was enormous, its jaws lined with teeth the size of daggers, and when it let out a low rumble, the sound reverberated through the clearing like distant thunder. The injured raptor froze, its eyes locked on the T-Rex as though hypnotized. The predator's golden eyes, fierce and unblinking, turned downward, fixing on the smaller creature before it. The raptor trembled, letting out a soft, high-pitched screech of panic. It knew what this was. The apex predator of the jungle had found it weak, alone, and defenseless. There would be no escape. The T-Rex lowered its massive head, nostrils flaring as it inhaled deeply. Its breath washed over the raptor in a hot gust, carrying the sharp scent of meat and earth. The injured raptor's limbs quaked as it crouched lower, its body pressed against the dirt as though trying to disappear. The T-Rex's eyes narrowed slightly, its jaws parting as it let out a deep, growling exhale. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. The jungle held its breath once more, the only sound the faint whimper of the smaller raptor and the slow, rhythmic breathing of the giant that towered above it. The T-Rex's jaws opened wider, its teeth gleaming in the dappled sunlight. Then it stopped. The injured raptor's eyes darted upward in confusion as the T-Rex paused, its massive head tilting slightly to the side. The predator's expression was unreadable, something between curiosity and indifference, as though it were studying the smaller creature. The T-Rex sniffed again, its nostrils flaring, and then, to the raptor's astonishment, it let out a low, rumbling growl, not of hunger, but of warning. The ground trembled as the T-Rex took a step back, its massive tail sweeping through the air behind it. The raptor remained frozen, unsure of what had just happened. Its body still screamed at it to flee, but confusion held it in place. Why hadn't the T-Rex attacked? Why was it still standing there, watching? Then, from the shadows at the edge of the clearing, another sound emerged, the faint, guttural calls of scavengers. The injured raptor's head snapped in their direction, its heart pounding anew. The T-Rex turned as well, its golden eyes narrowing as it caught sight of the movement. Dilophosaurs, smaller than the raptors, but no less deadly, crept from the underbrush, their crests flaring as they hissed hungrily. They had caught the scent of weakness, and they had come to claim what the raptor pack had left behind. The injured raptor screeched in fear, stumbling backward as the scavengers crept closer. But before they could advance, the T-Rex let out a roar that shook the entire clearing. It was a sound of pure dominance, a force of nature given voice. The scavengers froze mid-step, their eyes wide with terror. The T-Rex took another step forward, its massive form casting a shadow over the clearing as it roared again. The Dilophosaurs scattered instantly, vanishing into the jungle like smoke in the wind. The T-Rex stood tall, its gaze sweeping over the clearing to ensure they were truly gone, before turning back toward the injured raptor. The smaller creature cowered, its body still trembling, but now its fear was mixed with something else, confusion, and perhaps the faintest glimmer of awe. The T-Rex let out a low growl, its massive head lowering once more. This time, the sound wasn't threatening. It was something else, something quieter, more deliberate. The injured raptor stared up at the giant, its eyes wide and unblinking. It didn't move as the T-Rex turned slowly and began to walk away, its tail swaying behind it like a pendulum. The ground shook with each step, but there was no aggression, no hunger. And as the T-Rex vanished into the shadows of the jungle, the injured raptor remained in the clearing, staring after it. For the first time, it was alone but not afraid. The jungle gradually settled back into its natural rhythm as the tremors of the T-Rex's departure faded into the distance. Birds fluttered back into the canopy, their cautious calls breaking the silence. The sunlight filtered softly through the trees again, illuminating the injured raptor where it lay, still crouched in the dirt. It had not moved, its limbs locked with exhaustion and lingering disbelief. The T-Rex had spared it. Not only that, but it had defended it, chased away the scavengers that would have torn it apart. Such a thing defied everything the raptor's instincts had ever known. In the brutal world of the jungle, there was no room for mercy. Weakness was punished, not protected. And yet, the injured raptor slowly raised its head, blinking as it scanned the clearing. The T-Rex was gone, swallowed once again by the dense shadows of the forest. Only faint impressions of its colossal footprints remained in the dirt, like scars left on the earth. The smaller raptor's gaze lingered on those tracks for a long moment before it finally shifted, its body trembling as it tried to stand. Its muscles protested with sharp bursts of pain, its wounded leg nearly giving out beneath it. The gash along its thigh burned, blood still crusted around the edges of the wound. For a moment, it swayed unsteadily, the effort of staying upright nearly too much to bear. But the raptor didn't collapse. Its instincts, those same instincts that had once driven it to hunt and survive, forced it to move. One step, then another. The jungle loomed around it, vast and uncaring. Every rustle of leaves, every creak of branches seemed to hide unseen dangers. The injured raptor limped forward, its head low as it forced itself through the underbrush. It wasn't running, couldn't run, but it moved anyway, driven by some faint, inexplicable need to follow the path the T-Rex had taken. Hours passed. The sun climbed high above the canopy, its light broken into fractured beams that danced across the forest floor. The injured raptor pressed on, its progress slow and unsteady. It had no destination, no pack to return to, no den to call home, but its instincts told it to keep moving. The world around it was alive with sound. Insects humming, distant calls of larger creatures echoing through the trees. Once or twice, it stopped to rest, collapsing onto the soft earth as exhaustion tugged at its body. Its breathing was shallow, its sides heaving, but it didn't close its eyes for long. The jungle was no place to let down its guard. It had learned that lesson well. But something strange began to happen as the hours passed. The raptor began to pick up faint signs, subtle clues in the landscape that it was not as alone as it seemed. Massive footprints pressed into the earth here and there, their size unmistakable. Broken branches hung low in odd angles, their edges torn and splintered by something impossibly large. And then there were the bones. The first carcass it found was fresh, a small herbivore, its body half consumed and abandoned in the underbrush. The raptor stopped and sniffed cautiously, its head darting up to scan the area for danger. But there was nothing, no sign of other predators. The kill was recent, the meat still warm, but the scent that lingered around it made the raptor's eyes widen. The T-Rex. It had passed through here not long ago. The injured raptor hesitated, unsure of what this meant. A part of it screamed to turn away, to move in any other direction. This was the apex predator's territory, after all. No creature with any sense wandered willingly into the domain of the king. And yet, another part of the raptor, a quieter, more curious part, pulled it forward. The raptor bent its head toward the carcass, sniffing again before taking a cautious bite. The meat was tender, still fresh, and the raptor tore off small, careful pieces, its body trembling with hunger as it ate. It had not fed in days, and each bite sent a surge of strength through its tired muscles. When it had eaten its fill, the raptor paused to clean its claws and muzzle, its golden eyes flicking warily toward the forest around it. There was no sign of movement, no growl of warning. It was as though the T-Rex had left the kill intentionally. The thought was absurd. The T-Rex was a predator, a creature of instinct. It would never leave food behind for another to take. And yet, the injured raptor couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than coincidence. It stepped carefully away from the carcass, its limp less pronounced now that it had regained some strength. For the first time since its pack had abandoned it, the raptor lifted its head high, its gaze sharp and alert as it moved forward through the jungle. By nightfall, the jungle had grown darker, the shadows stretching long and deep beneath the canopy. The injured raptor moved cautiously, its claws digging into the soft earth as it navigated the terrain. The jungle at night was an entirely different world, a world of predators whose eyes glowed in the dark, whose growls echoed like whispers through the trees. The raptor's senses were on high alert as it walked, its ears twitching at every distant sound. It had always been a skilled hunter, but now, wounded and alone, it knew that it was no longer the predator. It was prey, but it wasn't alone. The first time it heard the familiar rhythm of distant footsteps, it froze. The sound was faint, almost imperceptible at first, but it grew stronger, louder, until the ground beneath the raptor began to vibrate with each heavy thud. The raptor turned its head slowly, its body tense as it scanned the darkened jungle. And then, through the trees, the T-Rex emerged once again. Its massive form was illuminated by the faint silver light of the moon, its scales glistening faintly as it stepped into the clearing. The raptor crouched low, its body shaking as the T-Rex's shadow fell over it. Instinct screamed at it to run, to hide, but the raptor didn't move. Couldn't. The T-Rex stopped a few feet away, its massive head tilting downward as it regarded the smaller creature. Its golden eyes narrowed slightly, and for a long moment, the two predators simply stared at each other. The raptor's breaths came quick and shallow, its body still tense. But something in the T-Rex's posture was different this time. It wasn't hunting. The T-Rex let out a low rumble, a sound so deep it seemed to vibrate through the very air around them. The injured raptor blinked, its head tilting slightly in confusion. The sound wasn't a growl of aggression. If anything, it almost sounded gentle. The T-Rex stepped forward again, its movements slow and deliberate, until it was standing just feet away from the smaller raptor. Its massive head lowered, its nostrils flaring as it sniffed the raptor once more. The injured creature didn't dare move, its eyes wide as it stared up at the giant. Then, to the raptor's astonishment, the T-Rex turned and began to walk away. Its tail swept gently over the ground, leaving deep marks in the earth as it moved back into the darkness of the trees. The injured raptor remained frozen in place, its mind struggling to make sense of what had just happened. The T-Rex had found it again, and yet it had chosen not to attack. Not only that, but it had brought food. It had allowed the raptor to eat, and now it was walking away as though it expected the smaller creature to follow. The injured raptor's instincts warred with one another. Follow the T-Rex? To what end? It was madness, suicidal even, and yet, a flicker of something else stirred within the raptor. Curiosity. It took a hesitant step forward, its claws pressing softly into the dirt. Then another. The T-Rex was disappearing into the trees now, its form blending with the shadows. The injured raptor paused for only a moment longer before limping after it, its movements slow but determined. The jungle seemed to stretch endlessly before them, the T-Rex leading the way with its colossal, unhurried strides. The raptor followed close behind, its wounded legs still aching but no longer holding it back as much. It felt strange, walking in the footsteps of the king of the jungle. Every fiber of its being told it that this was unnatural, that predators did not form bonds, did not protect one another. But tonight, as the moon cast silver beams across the jungle floor, the injured raptor limped through the darkness with the T-Rex ahead of it, its fear giving way to something else entirely. For the first time since its pack had turned on it, the raptor felt something that it couldn't quite name. It wasn't trust, not yet, but it was close. The raptor followed the T-Rex deep into the heart of the jungle, where the forest grew thicker and darker than anywhere it had ever been. The canopy overhead seemed to close in, swallowing what little moonlight filtered through the leaves. Shadows twisted across the ground, and the air grew heavy with moisture, the scent of earth and vegetation thick in the raptor's nostrils. The T-Rex moved without hesitation, its massive feet leaving deep impressions in the soil. The injured raptor limped after it, careful to place its feet in the giant's tracks. It still didn't fully understand what was happening, why the apex predator had spared it, why it now led the way as though it had a destination in mind. But for the first time since its pack had abandoned it, the raptor did not feel completely alone. Every now and then, the T-Rex would pause, its enormous head lifting as it sniffed the air. Its golden eyes scanned the darkness with sharp intensity before it moved forward again, each step deliberate. The raptor observed this behavior quietly, its own instincts telling it that the T-Rex was watching for threats, protecting itself, or perhaps protecting them both. The thought lingered, unspoken, in the back of the raptor's mind. Hours passed, and the raptor's limbs grew heavier with fatigue. Its wounded leg ached fiercely, the muscles throbbing with every step. Still, it pressed on, unwilling to let the distance between itself and the T-Rex grow too wide. It had no pack now, no safety. This towering beast before it was the closest thing to protection the raptor had ever known. Finally, the T-Rex came to a halt. The ground here was different, softer, more uneven, as though the earth itself had been disturbed. The raptor stopped as well, panting softly as it took in its surroundings. They stood in a small clearing, shrouded in mist that clung to the ground like a living thing. The trees here were ancient, their trunks gnarled and twisted, their roots sprawling across the earth like the veins of some slumbering beast. The T-Rex turned its massive head, golden eyes fixing on the smaller raptor. For a moment, the two predators stared at each other, the silence thick between them. Then, with slow, deliberate movements, the T-Rex lowered itself onto its haunches. The ground trembled faintly beneath its weight as it settled into a resting position, its tail curling around its body like a protective wall. The injured raptor blinked, confused. It had never seen such behavior before, not from a creature like this. The T-Rex's posture was calm, its movements relaxed, as though it no longer saw the smaller raptor as a threat or as prey. For a moment, the injured raptor hesitated, its instincts warring with its exhaustion. It wanted to run, to hide, but its body refused to move. Finally, it limped forward cautiously, its golden eyes fixed on the T-Rex as it approached. The larger predator did not move, did not growl. It simply watched. The raptor stopped a few feet away, its breathing ragged as it sank onto the ground. It folded its legs beneath its body, its tail wrapping tightly around itself for warmth. Its injured leg ached, but the pain seemed distant now, numbed by the surreal reality of what was happening. The T-Rex, this towering, monstrous predator, had led it here, and now they rested together, two creatures who by all rights should have been enemies. For the first time in days, the raptor allowed its eyes to drift closed. Sleep came reluctantly at first, but then it claimed the raptor completely, dragging it down into the comforting darkness of unconsciousness. The raptor awoke to the sound of distant thunder. Its eyes snapped open, its senses sharpening as it lifted its head. The jungle was still dark, but the air felt different now, charged, electric, as though a storm were gathering just beyond the trees. The raptor's nostrils flared as it sniffed the air, its instincts prickling with unease. The T-Rex was already awake. It stood at the edge of the clearing, its massive head lifted as it scanned the horizon. Its posture was tense now, its muscles rippling beneath its scaly skin as though it, too, sensed the coming storm. The injured raptor rose unsteadily to its feet, its wounded leg protesting the movement. It let out a soft, questioning screech, its head tilted as it looked toward the T-Rex. The larger predator turned its head slightly, its golden eyes locking onto the smaller creature. It let out a low rumble, a sound that seemed both warning and reassurance. Then the thunder came again, louder this time, but it wasn't the sound of a storm. The injured raptor froze, its gaze snapping toward the jungle beyond the clearing. The ground began to tremble beneath its feet, faint at first but growing stronger with each passing second. The sound was rhythmic, pounding, like a drumbeat echoing through the earth. The injured raptor's breath quickened as it realized what it was hearing. Footsteps. The T-Rex turned fully now, its massive frame shifting as it braced itself. Its head lowered slightly, its teeth bared in a silent snarl. The injured raptor crouched low, its heart pounding as it scanned the trees. The footsteps grew louder, closer, until the source of the sound emerged from the darkness. It was another pack of raptors, 6 of them, moving in formation like shadows slicing through the jungle. They were lean and deadly, their movements synchronized as they stepped into the clearing. Their eyes gleamed in the faint light, and their bodies seemed to hum with the thrill of the hunt. The injured raptor recognized them instantly, its pack. The leader stepped forward, its scars and size unmistakable. It paused at the edge of the clearing, its gaze locking onto the injured raptor with a look that sent a chill through its bones. The injured raptor let out a low, uncertain screech, its tail twitching nervously. It didn't know whether to fight or flee. What little loyalty it had once felt for the pack had been replaced by a deep, instinctive fear. The leader took another step forward, its head lowering as it bared its teeth. The other raptors followed, spreading out in a semicircle as they closed in. The injured raptor stepped back instinctively, its golden eyes darting toward the T-Rex. The larger predator had not moved. It stood silently, its gaze fixed on the approaching pack. But the tension in its posture was unmistakable. Its muscles were coiled like springs, ready to release at the first sign of danger. The T-Rex let out a low, rumbling growl that shook the air, a sound that sent a clear message. This clearing was its territory. The leader of the raptors paused, its head snapping toward the T-Rex. For a moment, the pack seemed to hesitate, uncertainty flickering in their eyes. They were hunters, fearsome and intelligent, but the T-Rex was something else entirely. It was power made flesh, a predator whose presence eclipsed all others. The injured raptor crouched lower, its claws digging into the earth. It knew it was the reason for this standoff. The pack had come for it, drawn by the scent of weakness, by the opportunity to cull what they had once abandoned. The T-Rex growled again, louder this time, its massive head lowering as it stepped forward. The ground trembled beneath its weight, and the injured raptor watched in awe as its protector unleashed a sound that seemed to shake the very trees. The roar was deafening, a primal explosion of sound that sent birds scattering from the canopy above. The pack of raptors froze, their confidence faltering. The leader snarled, its tail flicking sharply as it turned to face the T-Rex. For a moment, the two predators stared each other down, one towering and monstrous, the other smaller but filled with a deadly cunning. Then the T-Rex took another step forward, its eyes blazing with unspoken fury. The pack hesitated, their unity breaking as fear rippled through them. The leader snarled again, but its posture was defensive now, its movements uncertain. The T-Rex roared a final time, the sound tearing through the clearing like a physical force. The injured raptor flinched, but it did not look away. It watched as the pack, its former family, began to retreat. One by one, they slinked back into the jungle, their movements quick and cautious. The leader lingered the longest, its eyes locked on the T-Rex as though trying to challenge it one last time. But even it knew better. With a sharp hiss, the leader turned and disappeared into the shadows, leaving the clearing silent once more. The T-Rex remained still, its chest heaving as it watched them go. Then, slowly, it turned its massive head to look at the injured raptor. The smaller creature blinked, its chest rising and falling with quick, shallow breaths. It was safe. The raptor let out a soft screech. Not of fear this time, but of something else. Gratitude, perhaps. It wasn't sure. But as the T-Rex turned and began to walk away, the raptor rose unsteadily to its feet and limped after it. This time, it did not follow out of fear. It followed out of trust. The jungle seemed to sigh in relief as the pack of raptors melted into the shadows, leaving the clearing behind. The injured raptor watched them go, its golden eyes unblinking. Its former family had turned their backs on it once again. But this time there was no sadness, no sense of betrayal, only quiet acceptance. It knew now that survival was not a matter of loyalty or belonging. It was something earned, and it had been earned here, in the presence of the towering beast that had saved it. The T-Rex began to move again, its massive frame shifting with a slow, deliberate grace. Its steps were heavy, each footfall leaving a deep imprint in the earth. But there was no urgency in its movements. It walked calmly, as though the confrontation had been nothing more than an inconvenience. Its golden eyes remained fixed ahead, scanning the jungle with the quiet confidence of a king surveying his domain. The injured raptor hesitated for only a moment before following. Its movements were slow and uneven. The wound in its leg still ached, but it pressed on, its instincts no longer telling it to run. The T-Rex had not only spared it, but defended it. Such an act defied every law of the jungle, every lesson carved into the raptor's mind through years of survival. And yet, here it was, limping in the footsteps of a creature that should have ended its life without hesitation. The T-Rex didn't seem to acknowledge the smaller creature following close behind. It didn't glance back, didn't issue any sound of warning or aggression. It simply moved forward, as though leading the way to something only it understood. For the injured raptor, the T-Rex was no longer a figure of terror. It had become something else entirely, a protector and ally, though the raptor did not yet have a name for it. They walked for what felt like hours, the jungle around them changing as they ventured deeper into its heart. The trees grew taller here, their branches intertwining like the ribs of some ancient beast. Vines hung thick from the canopy, swaying gently in the faint breeze, and the air felt heavier, thick with the scent of damp earth and decay. This place was older than the rest of the jungle, untouched by time or predators. It was a place few creatures dared to go. The injured raptor stopped briefly to catch its breath, its sides heaving as it sank onto the ground. Its muscles burned with exhaustion, the wound on its leg throbbing dully with every step. Still, it kept its gaze fixed on the T-Rex ahead, unwilling to lose sight of the creature that had led it this far. The T-Rex paused then, as though sensing the raptor's fatigue. It turned its massive head slightly, its golden eyes glinting in the dappled light as it regarded the smaller predator. The injured raptor froze, instinct forcing it to lower its head in a submissive posture. But the T-Rex didn't move. It didn't snarl or growl. It simply stood there, waiting. For a long moment, the two creatures remained like that, the T-Rex towering and unyielding, the injured raptor small and vulnerable. Then, with a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the very air, the T-Rex turned and began walking again, slower this time, as though it understood the raptor needed time to recover. The injured raptor blinked in surprise, its heart pounding in its chest. It didn't understand why the larger predator behaved this way. It defied everything it knew, every instinct it had ever trusted. But slowly, cautiously, it rose to its feet and limped forward, falling back into step behind the T-Rex. As the jungle thinned, they emerged into a clearing unlike any the raptor had seen before. The land stretched wide and open, bathed in golden light as the sun began to dip toward the horizon. Grasses swayed gently in the breeze, their tips catching the sunlight in bursts of gold and green. The clearing was bordered by cliffs on one side, jagged rocks rising high into the sky like the walls of some forgotten fortress. At the base of the cliffs, a small river wound its way through the grass, its waters glinting like liquid silver. The T-Rex paused at the edge of the clearing, lifting its head to scan the area with quiet vigilance. The injured raptor stood beside it, its eyes wide as it took in the scene before them. It had never been here before, never seen a place like this. It was beautiful in its own wild and untamed way, and for the first time in days, the raptor felt a faint sense of calm. The T-Rex let out a low rumble, its gaze lingering on the cliffs before it began to move toward the river. The injured raptor followed, its movements slow but steady now. The ache in its leg was still there, but it was easier to bear as the soft grass cushioned each step. The river's gentle murmur reached its ears, a sound so peaceful it felt out of place in the brutal world it knew. When they reached the water's edge, the T-Rex lowered its massive head and began to drink, its movements careful despite its size. The injured raptor hesitated, watching the water ripple outward in perfect circles. For a moment, it didn't move. It had been taught to fear vulnerability, to avoid lowering its head, to stay alert at all times. But here, beside the giant predator that had spared it, that fear felt distant. Slowly, the raptor stepped closer to the water, its claws sinking into the damp earth. It bent its head and drank, the cool water soothing its parched throat. The T-Rex lifted its head then, droplets of water cascading from its jaws as it turned to watch the raptor. Its golden eyes were calm, almost gentle. The injured raptor finished drinking and sat back on its haunches, the pain in its leg dulled by the cool earth. Turned its head to look up at the T-Rex, and for the first time it didn't feel afraid. There was no need for submission, no need to lower its gaze. The T-Rex had defended it, led it here to this place of safety and quiet. And for reasons the raptor could not understand, the larger predator seemed to accept its presence. The sun dipped lower in the sky, painting the clearing in hues of orange and red. Shadows stretched long across the grass, and the air grew cooler as the day began to fade. The T-Rex settled onto the ground near the riverbank, its movements slow and deliberate, as though it too was ready to rest. The injured raptor watched it for a long moment before curling up nearby, the soft grass cushioning its body as its eyelids grew heavy. It was a sight no creature had ever witnessed before. Two predators, one towering and monstrous, the other small and wounded, resting side by side in perfect harmony. The jungle remained silent around them, as though even the trees and rivers dared not disturb the peace of that moment. The raptor awoke in the dead of night. Its eyes snapped open, its senses immediately sharpening as it lifted its head. The air was cool and still, the sounds of the jungle muted as though the forest itself had fallen asleep. The T-Rex remained where it had been, its massive body rising and falling with each slow breath. The raptor sniffed the air cautiously, its ears twitching. Something felt different, off. A faint rustling reached its ears, coming from somewhere deep within the jungle. The raptor froze, its muscles tensing as its instincts screamed of danger. It glanced toward the T-Rex, but the larger predator didn't stir, its breathing still slow and steady. The rustling grew louder, and the raptor's golden eyes narrowed as it scanned the darkness. The sound was familiar. Footsteps, quick and light, moving through the underbrush. The raptor's heart began to pound, and it let out a faint screech of warning. The T-Rex's eyes snapped open instantly, its golden gaze cutting through the dark. It lifted its massive head, nostrils flaring as it sniffed the air. A low growl rumbled from its chest, deep and menacing, as though it too sensed the danger closing in. From the darkness of the jungle, the raptors emerged. The injured raptor's former pack had returned, their golden eyes glowing faintly as they crept into the clearing. They moved like shadows, their bodies low and deliberate as they surrounded the edges of the open space. The leader was at the front, its scarred face twisted in a snarl as it fixed its gaze on the injured raptor. The smaller raptor froze, its body trembling. It knew why they were here. The pack had returned to finish what they'd started, to cull the weak, to eliminate the one they had abandoned. The clearing no longer felt safe, felt like a trap. The T-Rex rose to its full height, its roar splitting the night like a crack of thunder. The pack of raptors hesitated, their snarls faltering as the towering predator stepped forward, its eyes blazing with fury. The T-Rex let out another roar, louder this time, the sound vibrating through the very earth. The injured raptor crouched low, its gaze darting between the pack and the T-Rex. For the first time, it saw the truth clearly. This was not a battle it could fight. But the T-Rex was something else. It was power, unyielding and unstoppable. And it would not let the pack win. The T-Rex lunged forward, its massive form crashing into the ground as the pack scattered, screeches of panic echoing through the clearing. The injured raptor watched in awe, its heart pounding as the king of the jungle defended what no one else had. The clearing erupted into chaos. The T-Rex charged forward with the unstoppable force of a storm, each step sending shockwaves through the earth. Trees shook, and the ground trembled beneath the weight of its movements. The pack of velociraptors scattered in all directions, their shrill screeches echoing through the night as they tried to avoid the jaws of the colossal predator. The injured raptor remained frozen at the edge of the clearing, its golden eyes wide as it watched the scene unfold. The T-Rex was a force of nature. Its every movement was calculated yet brutal, its roars cutting through the night like thunder. The raptors had always been fierce hunters, but now they looked small, insignificant in the face of this raw power. The leader of the pack snarled, its sharp teeth bared as it darted toward the T-Rex's flank, attempting to strike. Its claws flashed in the moonlight as it leapt, aiming for the vulnerable flesh near the larger predator's legs. But the T-Rex was faster than it seemed. With a deafening roar, it spun, its massive tail sweeping through the air like a battering ram. The blow struck the leader mid-leap, sending it hurtling across the clearing to crash into the ground with a sickening thud. The raptor lay still, its body limp. The other members of the pack faltered, their snarls turning to sounds of uncertainty. They glanced toward their fallen leader, then back at the towering form of the T-Rex, whose golden eyes blazed with an unrelenting fury. The message was clear. This was not their prey, not anymore. The T-Rex let out another roar, its head snapping toward the remaining raptors. It took a step forward, its jaws opening wide to reveal teeth like daggers, gleaming in the moonlight. The pack hesitated only a moment longer before turning tail, disappearing into the darkened jungle one by one. Their screeches faded into the distance, swallowed by the shadows of the trees, until the clearing was silent once more. The T-Rex stood still in the center of the clearing, its massive chest rising and falling with slow, deliberate breaths. Its golden eyes scanned the area, ensuring the raptors were truly gone, before its posture relaxed ever so slightly. The danger had passed. At the edge of the clearing, the injured raptor remained crouched low, its body tense as its mind tried to process what had just happened. The T-Rex had defended it again. It had driven away the pack, the very creatures that should have been the raptor's family. But instead of claiming the smaller predator as prey, the T-Rex had stood between it and death, as though protecting it was its purpose. The injured raptor let out a soft, uncertain chirp, its head tilting slightly as it watched the larger creature. The T-Rex turned its massive head toward the raptor, its golden eyes fixing on it once more. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The clearing was silent, the tension slowly fading like a receding tide. Then, in a gesture so unexpected that it seemed impossible, the T-Rex let out a low, rumbling sound, a growl that wasn't filled with fury or dominance. It was softer, quieter, almost gentle. The injured raptor blinked, its heart pounding as it processed the sound. It didn't understand this bond, this unspoken connection between predator and prey. All it knew was that it felt safe in the presence of this towering giant. Slowly, hesitantly, the smaller creature rose to its feet. Its wounded leg still ached, but it no longer felt like a burden. The T-Rex turned away then, its massive frame shifting as it began to walk back toward the jungle. Its tail swept behind it in slow, deliberate movements, and its footsteps shook the ground as it moved. The injured raptor hesitated, glancing back toward the darkness where its pack had disappeared. There was nothing left for it there, no safety, no loyalty. The pack had abandoned it, cast it aside as though it had no worth. But the T-Rex had chosen differently. With a final glance toward the empty clearing, the injured raptor turned and began to follow. Its limp was still pronounced, but there was a new determination in its movements, as though the weight of the past had been left behind. It followed the T-Rex into the jungle, its small form nearly disappearing beneath the shadows cast by the larger predator. Days passed, and the bond between the two creatures grew in ways that defied the laws of nature. The T-Rex led the way, its movements slow and steady, while the injured raptor followed close behind, limping but no longer falling behind. The T-Rex hunted with ease, its sheer power enough to drive away any creature that dared to challenge it. And every time it fed, it left scraps of meat for the smaller raptor, who ate gratefully. The injured raptor's leg began to heal, the wound slowly scarring over. Its movements grew steadier, its steps more confident, though it never strayed far from the T-Rex. Together, they moved through the jungle like two mismatched shadows, one towering and monstrous, the other small but unyielding. Other creatures of the jungle learned to steer clear of them. The T-Rex was the king, after all, and anything that followed in its shadow was not to be trifled with. Scavengers dared not approach. Packs of predators gave them wide berths. Even the wind seemed to quiet when they passed, as though the jungle itself recognized the strange, unspoken bond that had formed between the two. The raptor began to change as well. Its fear faded, replaced by a quiet confidence that it had never known before. It was no longer weak, no longer abandoned. It had survived where others would not have, and it had earned the protection of the jungle's greatest predator. In time, the smaller creature began to chirp softly as it walked, its calls echoing faintly through the trees, a sound not of fear, but of contentment. The T-Rex never responded, but the raptor didn't need it to. It understood. One evening, as the sun dipped low on the horizon, the two creatures came to rest on the edge of a vast plateau. The ground beneath them sloped upward, giving way to a sweeping view of the jungle below. The T-Rex lowered itself onto its haunches, its golden eyes scanning the horizon as the last light of day painted the world in shades of orange and crimson. The injured raptor stood beside it, staring out at the same view. For a long time, neither of them moved. The jungle stretched endlessly before them, alive with movement and sound. But up here, there was only silence. The wind brushed gently through the raptor's feathers, carrying with it the scent of earth and freedom. The raptor turned its head, glancing up at the T-Rex. The larger creature remained still, its gaze fixed on the horizon, its chest rising and falling with slow, steady breaths. The injured raptor chirped softly, a quiet sound that was almost lost in the wind. It wasn't a call for attention or a cry for help. It was something simpler, a sound of gratitude. The T-Rex did not respond at first. Then, slowly, it turned its head, its golden eyes meeting the raptor's gaze. The two predators, so different, yet bound together by something neither of them could name, regarded each other in silence. In that moment, the jungle no longer mattered. The rules of survival, the laws of predator and prey, they were irrelevant. What mattered was the bond they had forged, the quiet understanding that had grown between them. The T-Rex turned back to the horizon, its massive frame silhouetted against the setting sun. The injured raptor sat beside it, its small form dwarfed by the giant predator. Together, they watched as the sky faded to darkness, the stars beginning to appear one by one, their light reflected in the stillness of the night. Two predators, one bond, an unspoken alliance born not of fear, but of trust. And in the vast, untamed wilderness of the jungle, where life and death danced on the edge of every breath, such a thing was nothing short of miraculous.